You, Tashana, and welcome everyone. I'm Jennifer Blatz. I'm the president and CEO of Strive Together, and I'm excited to see quite a few familiar names and faces on today's webinar. And I also know that there might be a few of you joining us who are new to us. So I'm going to kick things off by just very briefly introducing Strive Together in case you don't know us. But Strive Together is a national network of community partnerships that bring together neighbors, including youth and families, nonprofits, businesses, schools, and more. And these place-based partnerships are working to put more young people on a pathway to economic mobility. Specifically, we're working to put 4 million more young people on a path to economic mobility by the year 2030. There are more than 70 communities in the Strive Together Cradle to Career Network. And these communities are leading effective collaboration, sharing resources, using data, and expanding strategies that get better outcomes for young people. We've been at this work now for more than a decade, and in that time, the network has made some incredible progress. And this afternoon, we have a really special program. We have the privilege of hearing from a leader who has been on this journey with us at Strive Together and with me from the very beginning. She's a leader who has not only transformed her community, her own community in place, but has also shaped this entire movement and shaped our network. She is a trailblazer and a truth teller. She founded one of the longest running cradle to career place-based partnerships in the country. And she is my dear friend, Susan Dawson, the founder of E3 Alliance in Austin, Texas. As hopefully many of you know, Susan has just published an extraordinary book sharing her wisdom from decades of work on education systems. I had the opportunity to read an advanced copy, and I keep my copy close at hand. It is an incredibly helpful resource. Something that excited me the most about this book and were all of the practical examples that Susan shares. Sometimes we at Strive Together, and across the place-based partnership field, talk about this work in the theoretical, our theory of action, but what you get from this book is really practical examples of what this looks like on the ground. In fact, there are 9 case studies on success that E3 Alliance has been leading over the 15 plus years that they have been at this work. For those of you who were with us last week in Atlanta for our 2025 annual Cradle to Career Network convening, we had an opportunity to speak with Susan. I got to join her in a conversation to kick off the convening. But if you were with us in Atlanta or if you joined us on the live stream, you know that our conversation was far too short. Susan is an incredible wealth of knowledge and has incredible experience in this work. And there was so much more that I wanted to ask her about. There was so much more that those in attendance at the convening wanted to ask her about as a result of the questions we had coming in. So we knew this would be the case, and the Strive Together team planned this session with Susan so that we could even dig more into her work. So if you weren't with us in Atlanta, no worries. But if you were with us, you know we're going to be in for an energizing afternoon this afternoon. So we're going to start by hearing from Susan. Then we have a few questions ready for her, and then it's your turn. So please be thinking of questions that you have for Susan. If you were in Atlanta last week and you submitted your question and we didn't get to it, submit it again, please. And if you're with us on Zoom, the best way to share your questions is through the Zoom Q&A feature. You can also use the chat. We'll be monitoring that. And then if you're joining us from YouTube, our team's going to be watching for questions in the comments section, and we'll bring them into the conversation. So I really encourage you to take this opportunity to ask any questions that you have. Susan is a true social innovator. She tells it like it is. And it's just such a privilege to be here with her today. And with her leadership, E3 Alliance has really become a nationally recognized Cradle to Career Partnership focused on education transformation. And they've got this special recipe that you'll hear about of data use, collaboration. And I know that I learn something every time I get a chance to connect with Susan. So with that, I'm going to be handing it over to Susan herself. Susan, thank you so much for joining us today. And we're excited to talk with you again.
Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you to the entire Strive Together team, and especially the Training Hub team for hosting this great opportunity to get together to talk about both my book and some of the lessons that we've found in this 2-decade journey. And you'll note from the title of the book that you can see here on the screen that we particularly called this Wisdom Gained as opposed to Lessons Learned, because lessons can be ephemeral and short-lived, and we really wanted to share what we had learned, not just at one point in time, but through wisdom gained that was repeated, successes, failures, successes, things that we had been told by other people, that we had communicated with us from partners, from higher ed institutions, from pre-K through 12 institutions, from all our different community-based partners, that we have learned, and the wisdom that we have gained through this work. So the book, as Jennifer said, is about half and half. The first half of it includes vignettes that are based on these wisdoms that we have gained, that are things that we want to take forward, that we want to learn from and share with others to learn from. The second half of the book is these case studies, 9 particular case studies about impact that we've had, about things that we've learned, about the ways that we have used data to create systems change at scale in education in Central Texas and throughout the state and beyond. So let me tell you a little bit about E3 Alliance. We were created in May of 2006. Essentially, we had been talking about this. We had been looking at ideas about what we wanted to do and what we thought we could lead to systems change, based on really a sense of frustration that we had primarily with business leaders, that while we were making changes happen here in Central Texas and across the state, and in fact, despite what you might hear from the media, we were getting better in almost every metric that you could measure for almost every group of students, and nevertheless, we were falling behind other nations, other populations in the 21st century global economy. So if we were falling behind by making these step function changes, then how would we create a real platform for systems change? And so we knew that systems are inevitably complex. They're often siloed. We say systems, but it's usually multiple disparate occupations, multiple disparate initiatives, programs. We needed what now has been termed a collective impact approach. We've coined, well, we did not coin, John Kanye and Mark Kramer coined that term collective impact about 5 years after we started the work of E3 Alliance, and we immediately recognized that this is what we had been undertaken. So the high-level overview of what we do is we combine data and collaboration with a variety of partners to be able to drive effective change at a systems level at scale, leading to economic prosperity. Since the very beginning, we have used the phrase education equals economics, because we know that this economic prosperity, this economic mobility will only be driven through the ability of our students to succeed in life and in whatever purpose, whatever mission they choose for themselves, as be that college, be that career, be that college and career, be that whatever path they would like to take towards their chosen venue, their chosen career, their chosen place to be successful in this world. So now I'm going to allow us to go to the poll. The first poll, we're going to get the input from you all. Looks like we have some good answers coming in. Lack of accessible, actionable data is interestingly last so far. Competing priorities is highest. No one yet has entered something else. So our lack of collaboration, competing priorities, and lack of accessible, actionable data fall at the very top of what people are thinking about today. I didn't predict this, but the competing priorities is the number one answer that people have given us. And I guess that is not something that should be surprising, because there are so many things that all of us are trying to juggle to be able to drive this effective work in systems change. We often say that we'll never have enough resources, we'll never have enough money to drive systems change at scale. And so one of the things that we have to be really good at is picking and doing the right things. So these competing priorities are really important. Okay, I'm going to go back and okay, so talking about the work that we do is powered by a foundation of data, and the power of using data and using data effectively is really critical to our work. So our approach to using data is not just collecting numbers, sharing numbers. It's about understanding the story behind those numbers to drive action. So it includes both quantitative information and data and qualitative. We often do focus groups. We often do collection of empathic interviews with our students and our families. We use qualitative and quantitative data and then make that not just accessible, but usable. So what is it that is our responsibility to be able to help our constituents, again, being very small to very large school districts, from very small private institutions of higher education to training schools to large public institutions of higher education, universities, and then not just making those data usable by training people, by walking them through this information that they need to be able to take advantage of, but how do we build a culture of data use so that people are not making decisions based on what it was that they most recently heard, but how is it that they are able to take advantage of that data through a culture of data use rather than the last person that's walked into their door with a case to be made, with a political vested interest in what it is that they want to see. We have many sources of data, public data directly from the Texas Education Agency, the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board, the Texas Workforce Commission. We have data that is available through the Texas Education Research Centers, which is a fairly unique still. I think 3 other states now, probably more, have this now, but is the ability to access a data warehouse that combines individual student data for the last 30 plus years, that is de-identified, of course, so we can't tell you who Jose Gomez is, but we don't know his address or his birthday, but we have these de-identified data that are individual that we can then combine and track longitudinally to be able to understand trends in outcomes. And then we can combine that data across different student demographic groups, again, from pre-K through workforce. And then when we need more data than is available through those public institutions, we will custom source that data when we have to. So we don't want to ask our partners for information that they don't need to give to us. They don't need to look for and dig up themselves if we don't have to. But if there's data that we believe that we need that's not available in other places, then we will develop instruments to be able to understand how to actually take advantage of that. So let me
get that. Could you try again?
So we talking about custom sourcing data, let me go to our first case study, which is one of the places that we have custom sourced data.
Susan, we can't see your slide. We can't see your case study slide. I don't know if they're advancing for you on your end.
Okay. There we go.
There we go.
Sorry about that. So our problem was that kindergarten readiness in the state of Texas had never been tracked when we started this effort over almost 15 years ago. And so we had to be able to understand how to develop an instrument, an assessment tool to understand which students were ready for kindergarten and then later could progress to 3rd grade reading, 3rd grade math, and be able to take advantage of that to build early learning platforms. So because this data was not collected by the state, we had to gather the best pre-K and kindergarten teachers from across the region to develop a kindergarten readiness assessment that was the first ever used in the state of Texas. We then recruited and trained teachers from across the region to take part in this sample study to be able to understand what correlated with readiness and how we could build that readiness in our student populations. It's important that this assessment was co-developed with our kindergarten teachers and our pre-K teachers so that this was not a point-in-time test, but an observational assessment on language and communications, on early numeracy, on social emotional skills, the whole gamut of information that our teachers thought were most important for being able to understand whether students were ready, and not just understand, but to provide a rubric for them to assess those capabilities and to support interventions for those students who needed interventions to be able to become ready for kindergarten and ready for school. We then disaggregated the sample data sets that we had and correlated data from pre-K to kindergarten, and then kindergarten to third grade reading and math to determine the odds ratios for kindergarten readiness and grade 3 reading and math based on pre-K enrollment and attendance by student group. This led to a collective effort across the region that was supported by videos, that was supported by social media, that was supported by outreach, role playing, so we could help parents and families understand what was required to help their students be ready for kindergarten. And by doing so, we were able to create a understanding across the region about what was most important for students to be kindergarten ready. We understood, based on our data, that you needed to have both full day pre-K and low student to teacher ratios so that you could have the quality provided to students to help them be ready. The results that we generated from that effort were truly amazing. So by launching that effort in Central Texas, we showed that 9 times as many students were able to access full day low ratio pre-K in this region in just 6 years without any legislation. This was local changes to practice and local policies that allowed the districts throughout Central Texas to be able to increase the high quality offerings to students. Based on that data from Central Texas, we were able to pass House Bill 3, working with other partners from around the state, which provided funding for full day pre-K statewide, immediately benefiting 250,000 students. So what were some of the strategies that we applied in doing this work? First was that we had to understand and be able to apply trusted third-party data that had been co-designed by practitioners and data that was paired and correlated with quantitative state public data to be able to analyze it in a way that was trusted and used throughout the region. Then we had to be able to make sure that we could make this data available to constituents, whether that be our partners in education, our partners in the community, in such a way that they could understand and utilize this data. So here is an example of one of the ways that we use data. This is a different data set. This happens to be middle school algebra 1 completion, which is another area that we work in that is one of the focus areas of Strive Together. And we have hyper disaggregated this data because we have access to data through the education research centers, the ERCs, by income, family income, by race, ethnicity, and by gender. And you can see that there are huge differences based on the population of students that we were looking at. But it's important to understand, as we often say, that data is not destiny. So one cannot use this data to try to place blame or to try to understand ways that we might put the onus on the student population, but to understand where we're not serving students the best so that we can improve their outcomes. So we call these the 16-way charts because these are the data that we can get from the Texas Education Agency They are not complete data sets. There are small populations, including indigenous populations in the state of Texas that we don't have access to, that are not included in these data sets. But you can see that there are many different ways to be able to provide data that is much more actionable. So all of this data, including much more, is available at the website data.e3alliance.org. If anybody would like to look after this show, I am not able to, we didn't have the time to be able to walk through that here, but the data.e3alliance.org site explains how this visual dashboard of information can make complex data accessible and understandable and usable to a broader audience of educators, parents, families, community leaders, those from across the region and the state. It's very important to us before we collect this information and analyze this information that we focus on the key metrics and indicators that matter so that we can take action based on the data, not just rely on academic research that gets published in a paper that goes on a bookshelf and no one will ever read. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Jen to be able to ask some questions and facilitate a discussion among the group about a couple of things that we've prepared for you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Susan. What an honor it is to be part of this conversation. For those that do not know, I'm Jen Sines, not Jen Blatz, who was on earlier, but I am the Director of State Policy with Strive Together, and also very fortunate that I was able to work under Susan's leadership for 5 years prior to joining Strive Together. So I've learned a lot and just really excited to be able to engage with you and Susan and share the incredible work that E3 Alliance has been able to impact within our state of Texas with Susan at the helm. So a couple of questions. We want this to be a very engaging conversation, and we realize that all of you listening in are at different phases in your work, whether it's policy or collective impact or place-based partnerships. But what I'd love for you to do is think about what data have you used to drive actionable change? Susan just really shared some key examples of data collection, the way in which E3 analyzes the data, disaggregates the data, and then also presents the data to the community, to the state as a whole, to really help them understand how do you take objective data to really understand what's broken at the systems level to be able to change that system. And then what data do you wish you had but don't have to drive the needed change? So kind of one, what's the data you've used to drive actionable change? And also kind of the other end of that, what data do you wish you had that you feel could help you drive action to get data to change things? Because we are working on 2 platforms and there's a lot of you, as much as we'd love to let you come off mute and engage in that conversation, we realize there's not an opportunity for that. So if you could just share your thoughts in response to these questions in chat, we'd love to kind of highlight some of those and lean into them for a little bit. So flood the chat, please. I know as an advisor and a director of state policy that there are a lot of conversations around data to drive change and data needs. So don't be shy. Waiting a little bit longer, student level longitudinal data. Lysandra, is that something that you've used, I'm assuming, to get some of your?
We would like to be able to follow it with, like, for example, an identifiable number all the way to employment, so that we can really understand the impact of the different strategies and policies that have been implemented across the state and in our region.
Yeah, really effective. I know that's one thing that E3 is really unique at in the state of Texas and works with a lot of community and partners to understand how to leverage longitudinal data. Using student, parent, and educator qualitative data to help drive technological and community engagement goal setting and strategies. Thank you, Isaac. Strong state data assets that are both hard to get to and hard to work with.
It's interesting, an interesting comment, because we have people who go through significant training at E3 Alliance to be able to access the data. We have to put in an application with the state to access that data. And so it is often the learning curve to access the data and use the data and know how to use it and access it that is the bigger problem than just, you know, it being accessible.
Yeah. Susan, you want to touch just a little bit? I think we have a little bit of time. The last statement is around chronic absenteeism data. And I love what you've shared, Melissa, around the communications campaign. I think a lot of times when we look at what's broken in the system, oftentimes it's messaging and or communications that really needs to be well thought of and implemented to move things. I know E3 did a chronic absentee reason study prior to COVID, so things have shifted, but is there anything you'd like to highlight there of lessons learned or how that moved kind of absenteeism in our community?
Yes, I'd be glad to. So this could be all another case study, I guess. But we looked at, based on information from Bob Balfans and Hetty Chang and others, about the importance not just of looking at averages of absences, but looking at the number of students and the percent of students that were chronically absent, because that is much more highly correlated with dropping out, with later student outcomes that are very, very negative. And so we looked around the country and found that there was no good published information about why, which students were absent, when and where. And so we worked with a partner to be able to undertake an absence reason study that we did in the samples of districts, school districts across the region, elementary, middle school, and high school. And I will tell you, without getting into too much detail, that the results were really fascinating. So, for instance, our young women were 4 times more likely to be absent and chronically absent because they were taking care of siblings at home than our young men were. And another thing was that middle school and high school boys were admitted to playing hooky as one of their primary reasons for not being in class, even though that they knew that that would be counted as an unexcused absence, and therefore they could be suspended for reporting that, but they reported it anyway. So it's a fascinating set of information that we were able to collect and utilize. But by working with a campaign about what was able to change people's views on what was important about being in school and why it was important to be in school consistently, we saw for the first time in decades that while student enrollment continued to rise, absenteeism actually started going down. And because of that, we were able to save $37 million for Central Texas schools by changing that trajectory.
Yeah, thank you. I always think that's a great case study because what it really shows too is that getting to the root cause, right? Because there's a lot of assumptions of why students are absent and or the strategies that we need to either continue or put in place. But had E3 not gone further into that chronic absentee reason study, they wouldn't have gotten to the real root cause and been able, I think, to have those successful improvements, both with students attending classes more regularly, but also the dollars that were delivered. One of the things that someone noted, Susan, and is around American Indian and Native students not being part of the data set. Do you want to highlight why that is? I know, but
Basically, it's because it's not reported by the state. In many cases, it's because the sample size is too low. In other cases, it has not been collected consistently, but it is not available to us. And so we can't report it. And we are frustrated that our data is incomplete, but it does show the great majority of student outcomes for all the different student populations that are highly represented in our data sets.
Thank you so much. Thank you for those that engaged. I think it's really important for us to really have insight into some of the responses to these questions, especially when we have a leader like Susan that could help share some of those lessons learned, fail forwards, and or successes. So Susan, I'd love for you to continue engaging us and really sharing about kind of the power of collaboration as you're navigating the data and the case studies and the successes that you've had.
Great. Well, I will do that. So let's see if I do this right this time.
Success, we see it.
Yes. Okay. So the power of collaboration is something that we feel is very, very important in our work. In fact, it's, as you saw, in our mission statement. So we combine both the data and the effective use of data to drive action with collaboration across what often are these competing silos, from focusing on programs at a small scale and changing that mentality to focus on a much more systems approach using effective collaboration across disparate entities. So to us, there are probably 4 key principles to creating this platform for effective collaboration. One is to build a common agenda. And so this is, again, in the original collective impact definition. What does it take to be able to understand and drive that platform for the common agenda? What is it that you want to see as outcomes? What is it that you can be able to define as measurements for those outcomes? How is it that you can get people together in a common fashion, no matter what their different missions and different job descriptions are? What defines success? In order to build that common agenda, you have to have relationships of mutual trust. I often say to people that we're not here to be liked. We're here to be trusted. So how is it that you create this platform for being able to trust one another, that we're here not to drive a political agenda or something from a vested interest, by having a platform for people trusting what it is that you're there to do? You have to have continuous communication. Stakeholders need to be in the loop. Practices and learnings, wisdom needs to be shared. We have something that I didn't show you today, but calling that we have our bright spots studies, where we look at which are the schools or parts of our region that are doing the best at different metrics, and how do we share those practices with others so that they can take advantage of them. We often use peer pressure in order to do that when appropriate. So for instance, we have with various groups that we collaborate with, we have what we call the stoplight charts that are red, yellow, green, where people come together and rate themselves with how they are doing on undertaking a particular mission or opportunity to take advantage of an initiative. And by being able to share that in public with one another, that creates the peer pressure that we don't have to say to people, why aren't you doing this? But they can see that they are red, and the guy next to them or the person next to them is yellow or green. And why is it that that district or that entity is making much more progress on what the initiative is? And by publishing that data internally, again, we would not share this externally. We do this with our partners. They are able to share that, for instance, with their district superintendent, and are able to then say, okay, based on this, I need your support in order to drive this change, to implement this change in our district. And then lastly, you have to be relentless. When it's the right thing to do, and you know it's the right thing to do, and data shows that it's the right thing to do, don't take no for an answer. So we also often say, don't just come to people and say, can you do this? But say, how can we? Make the assumptive close about, we are going to do this. How is it that we are going to come together to be able to make the changes that we know that we want to see? So now I'm going to move to the second case study. Why is this not moving? There we go. The second case study, which is based on understanding how to improve the transition and the pathways from high school to college and career. We knew that there was consistently for the last decade low post-secondary enrollment. That's improved now post-pandemic in some parts of the country, but our post-secondary enrollment and completion rates are still far too low, and there is a understanding among parents and families that creates this perception that even though the data says otherwise, that attending college, whether that is, again, a 4-year degree or beyond, whether that is a 2-year associate's degree, whether that is some other post-secondary credential, that there is not the value that makes it worth the investment. Again, the data says that that is not correct, that there is great value in pursuing some education and credentialing beyond high school. But there is a disconnect in the alignment between high school curriculum, higher ed offerings, and workforce needs. And it's something that we need to work backwards on by defining what does industry say are their highest priorities in terms of knowledge and skills gained by students, and then understand how does that translate backwards into post-secondary offerings, courses, and skills that may be soft skills, maybe otherwise, and then how does that translate backwards into what is offered at the high school level from the high school curriculum and courses that are provided. And this lack of alignment is something that we had noticed again, that it was reported to us by our industry partners and across the spectrum, but we needed to be able to understand how to better align and what that was and how we would launch on that effort. So we chose a focus sector of advanced manufacturing. In Central Texas and across much of the country, in fact, most of the country, healthcare has some of the biggest, if not the biggest, supply-demand gaps and people going into the various medical fields. In Central Texas, the highest percentage gap is in advanced manufacturing, and it is a gap that is expected to grow over the next 10 years. So by that, I mean semiconductor design, semiconductor and chip production, robotics, electric vehicles, things like that, that are high-tech and require significant skills that can be gained, again, at various levels of credentialing, but are required to go into those advanced manufacturing industry careers. Also, it is an industry that is not well known by families and parents. So I often say everybody might not want to be a nurse, but everybody understands what a nurse is and what the opportunities are with that. That is not true with advanced manufacturing. There are lots and huge sectors of our population that doesn't understand what semiconductor manufacturing is and why it's important to our economic platform, and further, what are the opportunities available and what are the earnings potential that is available through these kinds of careers. So E3 Alliance fostered a collaboration by bringing together pre-K through 12 school districts, higher education institutions, major employers around the common needs of advanced manufacturing. We facilitated conversations around, obviously, the data and trends. What were those? What would we expect as the needs? What were the skills required? We collected and shared student perspectives and family perspectives, because this qualitative data was especially important in communicating the opportunities and the early earnings potentials of these kinds of careers. We also were able to understand through student-focused communications, common alignment, how to increase opportunities available for students. For instance, in support of recent legislation passed in the state of Texas that would allow students to be able to take college level courses called dual credit courses while in high school and gain college credentials while in high school, generally at no cost or at perhaps just the cost of materials and books. So we shared these pain points and perspectives with our families and with our industries and with our partners to be able to create the common alignment, increasing dual credit offerings and better aligning these career-focused curriculum. Our one-year goal, target objective, was to increase the enrollment in the advanced manufacturing pipeline by 1,750 students, from the baseline of literally just a few hundred students that were taking any classes related to advanced manufacturing. What we found is that in just a year and a half, we have achieved over a 3,300 student increase in those students who are preparing for careers in advanced manufacturing. Now, not all those students will, of course, be retained in the pipeline, but we are well ahead of our schedule of what are the objectives that we wanted to achieve by combining efforts to align and communicate, as well as addressing the shortage of faculty in these particular career pathways, and being able to optimize the training facilities that were available to students and the accessibility of training facilities for students to be able to prepare for these pathways. So now I'm going to put it back to Jen, and there we go. And if you can, please let us know how to be able to understand from your perspective how we can create more of the opportunities for collaboration.
Yeah, thanks, Susan. I think that's an incredible case study to really think about all of the different key players that you had to bring to the table when you talk about the high school to college to kind of workforce pipeline. You shared that you had K-12 at the table. You shared that you had to bring in not just four-year colleges, but more importantly, two-year colleges. You also thought about industry partners and really aligning those. And so what I'd love for those that are part of this conversation with us is if you could also share in chat, what are your strategies to bring the right people to the table? And I say right kind of in quotation marks, right? Because you really have to be strategic on who that person is that you pull in from whatever industry you're thinking about or that cross-sector partner relationship. And then also think about how do you balance the inclusiveness versus urgency? Those are two things I think in this work that we're always having to think about and consider as we're forming those tables and setting the table for the people we want to bring. So go ahead and drop your thoughts on those two questions in chat. So really think strategically about strategies to bring the right people and or the balance of inclusiveness versus urgency. How about just right people to the table? My favorite part of Zoom is I can see the participants. I know you're there, Tatiana. I know you're there, Jody.
I'm writing the questions down. So I can use them later, but I'll get in here.
I think these are, I know some of you are really thinking about this. So we have some funders, students, systems partners. Yep, Willie, all those people. Oh, Lysandra, I love that. Developed a matrix that helps us strategize influencers on the work. So we were able to prioritize our focus. Love me a good matrix. Target champions. Yes, Jody. I also love that terminology. I think it's very inviting and it messages to people that it's going to be specific, right? There's a target specific, so it's not this broad thing that they're getting involved in that they're to be overwhelmed. Justin, you share, we have built strong relationships with certain partners over the years when we discuss our community needs and who they think they can help. We trust them to make decisions that is best for the collaborative. So leveraging relationships with other partners to invite. Is that something, Susan, you've seen effective as well?
Absolutely. The ability to not just push information out, but meaningfully engage with partners so that they are helping co-design what the answers need to be is critically important.
Yeah. I love Joe also shared from NextGen that they started the conversation with the industry, really thinking about if we want the tables to talk about workforce, bringing the kind of industry folks at the table. And I think in your case study, one of the important things that E3 was strategic about is bringing on an association that already had relationships with kind of all the advanced manufacturing organizations within the community, which really, I think, helped strengthen the trust of that relationship as well.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much for those that dropped in. I love your input and feedback, and we're definitely carrying these comments over as we think about this work and just, the support and how we can really be a resource to you in this space. But definitely Susan's book gives a lot of great examples in addition to what we're sharing. So Susan, I'd love to kind of take it back to you, and I love that you're going to share the theory of change next with everyone as we continue this conversation of really what you've learned over these years.
Great. So let's go to what is our theory of change in the terminology of Strive Together. There is the theory of action, which we E3 Alliance have had continuous engagement with, but we started our own theory of change before that. So you'll see some similarities in this, but this is not the same as theory of action that Strive Together uses. So in simple terms, our theory of change is all based on a platform of data-based decision-making, but we use this to progress from the why to the how to the what. So why is brought together by convening key influencers, those who can help us define what we think that we need to do, what our priorities should be, and then collect data to be able to identify what the key insights are that we think will be needed to create a commitment to change. Why is it that we want to do this? We then progress to the how by building again in the collective impact jargon, how we want to build the common agenda of what the outcomes should be, how they should be measured, what would success look like. And often that means forging new collaborations with people who may not have been at the table, or that you may need to expand the table to be able to have the right kinds of insights and perspectives in order to design the solutions that you want to see. And only then do we then move to the what, which includes how do we change practices, because those often happen through things that we may have some influence on, but we don't have authority over. So how do we understand what practices need to change and how we go about doing that? And not just how do we do that, but how do we build the capacity in the organizations, which are often direct service organizations, whether that's our community-based partners, whether that's our institutions of higher education, whether that's our school district or our childcare providers. How do we build capacity to be able to serve students and families better so that ultimately we lead to a platform for systems change at scale, so that we can sustain a culture of high performance, high outcomes for all of our students. And while this may look like it is straightforward, sequential kind of operations that brings together the data to inform the collaboration and the collaboration to act on the data to increase the capacity of our partners and our institutions to be able to drive systems change, it is important to understand that this is not a sequential process. Often this takes many, many years. It's very iterative. We might identify data insights, and then once we go to build a common agenda or bring new partners to the table, we might understand that we need to collect additional data and go back. And so this is often something that requires significant iteration and may take months or even years to undertake and to drive this theory of change. Okay, so before I send it back to Jen, I'm going to not let you all get away with unscathed with just an hour and a half of your time invested, because I would like you all to think about what is one key challenge in your community. What is a data source that you believe could shed light on it? And then identify the key coalition members who you think could come together in collaboration to help address this challenge. And then looking at that, think about what will you do after this webinar to address this challenge. And don't just think about it, but actually, before you go back to your everyday lives and your everyday sports teams and your kids' sports teams and the 1,000 other things that you have going on in your lives, write yourself an email and answer these questions of what is a key challenge, a data source that might inform that, and who needs to be at the table to have the right amount of inclusivity and urgency and the balance between those two, so that you can have a game plan for yourself to be able to come back to refer to how you think you might address this key challenge. So you have actual homework, is I want you to be able to come together and think about, maybe with your colleagues, maybe by yourself, to be able to understand what these challenges are and how you might be able to address them.
It definitely wouldn't be a Susan webinar if we didn't have homework tied to it.
Okay, so thank you very much. This is the end of my portion, and I'm going to turn it over back to Jen Sines to be able to get some interaction from you all and be able to tee up a conversation that we would like to have with you about how we undertake these challenges.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge, Susan, with us today. What a treat just to have your experience. As Jen Blatz mentioned, the longest running collective impact place-based partner that we have, and such success that you've been able to really drive in both in the Central Texas area, but most importantly in Texas as a whole. So before I turn it over to audience Q&A, and thank you for those that have put some questions in, we're capturing those. So if you have more, please put them in your Zoom Q&A or the chat function, and we'll make sure whether we answer them right now in this webinar, or Susan follows up with responses to those questions, and we send those to you. But I'd like to start with just a foundational question, Susan. So in your book, you talk about leading through influence versus structural authority. Can you tell us more about that?
Sure, I'd be glad to. My marketing people often cringe, I think, when I say this, but I like to say that all we're trying to do is undertake massive systems change with utterly no authority over anyone to do anything. So we can't tell, college admissions officers or boards of regents or superintendents or curriculum and instruction directors or anyone want to do. They don't report to us. And we actually debated early on when we were forming E3 Alliance whether we wanted to create some sort of platform for structural authority, like many parts of our state and country have regional mobility authorities or similar institutions. Did we want to create a common platform where money or other resources might be distributed through E3? And we ultimately decided no, that was not the right way to go about things, because while that might be codified as a power structure that could be effective, that was likely only going to be effective in the short term. And by leading change through influence, we were more likely to have a lasting collaborative set of decisions that people would be willing to undertake, again, because they trusted us, because they wanted to be part of this collaborative effort to be able to come together to create the change that we wanted to see. So the power of influence is something that we think is critically important to our work, more important than the power of authority.
I love that. Thank you. And it really fits nicely with this next question that has come in from our participants today. So we have building trust in each other and in the power of institutions to reform for the better seems uniquely challenging in this political climate. Can you talk about specific trust building strategies in this time of community fragmentation and fear?
Boy, that's
It's a big one. I know.
That's a tough one. And it's interesting because it's there was a breakout for those of you who got to go to Atlanta and may have been part of this breakout on some of the messaging that Strive Together has been working on developing about how to message effectively in this political climate, because there are different audiences that you want to be able to influence. There are different messages that are appropriate for those different audiences, and the messenger actually matters a lot. Who is there to deliver that message matters a lot. So I think that part of it is being able to have a thoughtful discussion, not just about what the message is, but who is the right person to, or people, to be able to deliver that message. And part of it is not trying to move too quickly, taking the time to be able to come together again in a nonpartisan, non-political way, sharing data, sharing stories, being able to tell and bring people in with what it is that to be the right message for the right people that can start to create that foundation of trust.
Yeah, so well said. So well said. I think the key things I heard is being very strategic, really thinking about the communication, thinking not just what you say, but who says it. And I love one of the things that really drew me to E3 and I learned so much from is this idea of objective data, right? Focus on who the system is impacting the most versus your particular subjective opinion about it. So thank you. This is one of my favorite questions that has come in. So I'm looking forward to your answer. What has surprised you the most after doing this work for over a decade? Be honest.
Surprised me the most. Well, let me go back to the concept again of building trust. One of the things that was a key learning and a big surprise to us early on was that we thought we were sharing data in a way that was not just truthful, but provided some context such that people would be open to that information. The data that we happened to be sharing was on college completion, and we created a regression line analysis of district income level, average income level, and college completion rates. And as you might be able to predict, those school districts that had least earnings on average had also the least college completion rates, and those with the highest average income had the highest completion rates. And we purposefully graphed that by income versus completion rates and purposefully explained that verbally every time we showed that information, because we wanted people to have the context in which to understand that this doesn't mean this is a good district or a bad district or whatever, but that there were contextual circumstances that contributed to that. Nevertheless, and all this was public data at the time. This was very public data. Nevertheless, one of our school district superintendent partners got pissed off, and he said, you know, I know this data is public data, but I don't like it being out there, and basically stopped being part of the alliance. And we tried everything that we could. We lobbied him, we lobbied his school board, we talked to community partners, everything that we could do to bring this district back into the alliance. And finally, we had to just wait him out and wait until he retired to be able to then talk to the next superintendent. And based on our understanding about, you know, trying even harder to create the context and the understanding of how to communicate effectively, we were able to create a relationship with this new superintendent that was very strong and made her one of our most impressive, most committed partners to the E3 Alliance. And so it was both surprising, but it was also a lesson learned about how to create that sense of trust before you share the data.
Yeah, what a great example. Thank you for sharing that. It's definitely surprising when people don't like their own data, right? Or want you to shift it because they don't like the way that you've presented it. Great sharing. We do have another question that's come in. So how do you respond to people who use data to support policies that create barriers and close opportunity gaps for people from historically marginalized communities? And then this person also said they agree data is really important, but they also know that you can make numbers say anything you want them to.
So the second part of the question, I would only partially agree with. I think if you are able to cite the right sources and provide the right context and background, there are, you know, as they say, facts are facts. Now, people can say what they want to create the story, but people can also refute that story by saying, you know, okay, I appreciate that, but here are the facts. Now, when you want to be able to help to understand, hold on, now I answered the second part, and then I didn't answer the first part.
That's okay. So how do you respond to people who use data to support policies or create barriers.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, this is again a, you know, a consequence of the divisive nature of the political climate that we're in, because the red states and the blue states, and sitting here in Texas, I'm in an extremely red state. And there are some people in fact, I think it was just yesterday that we signed the bathroom bill in Texas. Governor Abbott signed the bathroom bill that discriminates against anyone who recognizes that they are of a gender that is not one of the two that are acceptable genders. And, you know, there are lots of people who want to be able to create an understanding that many of the people in the blue states might not agree with. But that's the environment that we live in. And so it goes back to, I think, understanding the message, understanding the messenger, understanding how to deliver that message so that you have the best opportunity for it to be heard and to be understood, to understand that, you know, even if it's not a person or a position that we agree with, that we're going to have a better opportunity to create understanding and a platform for change, even if it's not immediate change, by having that ability to create, you know, the message that may not resound immediately, but over time should hopefully resound. I'm not sure whether that answered your questions, because there is a lot of disappointing. I'm going to try not to use many 4-letter words in this webinar, but there's a lot of disappointing information that's out there and policy making that's out there that doesn't make sense for a whole lot of our students and families.
Yeah, and I think, you know, I think you did answer it. I think kind of to summarize it, when you're thinking about the data and or the system that you're trying to change, you almost have to prepare messaging for offense and defense that provides that factual lens. So I appreciate that. I think we have time for one more question before we close. So this one is coming from Rock the Future with Willie Robinson. So how can you get funders to stick with you as a collective impact process unfolds? Really thinking about gathering feedback, data from those impacted by the system you're trying to change, analyzing the data and developing strategies to move the needle. So really think about, how do you get funders to stick with you through like that beginning to end process?
I think the good news is that there are, and the pandemic was part of what was driving this, not entirely, but part of what was driving this is that there are a lot of funders that are taking much more of a long view than used to be. So when we started this process, funders were typically doing 1-year grants. Now we're almost always seeing 3-year grants, sometimes 5-year grants. And so they really are taking the long-term view and sticking with partners that they believe in. When you create the understanding with them that systems change takes a long time. And, you know, again, back to that theory of change that I talked about, sometimes, as I said, it takes years to be able to implement the change that you want to see. And so creating that understanding with funders that this is not going to be an immediate solution. This is not something that you're going to see, you know, next week, next year even. But that we need to be in this for the long haul, in order to see the kind of systems change that you desire and we want to deliver.
Yeah. And I think the case study that you shared around early childhood is a really good example of this too. Having had gone through that process and also then yielded state policy change, you're able to share that narrative of this is how we started and getting to that real root cause to see the level of impact that it has. I think once funders can see that narrative and understand it, they start to realize the process and the time that it takes if we're really going to change systems. If we're just going to throw dart at a wall and change something and hope it sticks, but this is about systems change. And I think that narrative becomes really important. Well, thank you so much. What a treat for me to be able to ask you these questions and help engage our audience. I'm going to turn it to Heidi now, who will take us away.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you to everybody for joining us today and for being part of this rich and meaningful conversation. Again, Susan, just special thank you to you for sharing your insights and expertise. It's been an inspiration, and I'm just so grateful that you that you lent your kind of knowledge and years of experience to us today, so that we could all learn from you. We're so grateful for everyone who provided, such thoughtful questions and engagement during this session, whether you joined us on Zoom or streamed live on YouTube. We would like to remind you that registration is open for our Training Hub offerings. The Strive Together Training Hub provides high quality, on-demand learning opportunities that build skills in collaboration, systems change, and outcome improvement.